What's up everyone, it's King Moose here with JCross to welcome you all back for episode 23 of Class Overview. For those who aren't familiar, the Class Overview series is a collection of informative videos where we're going to be discussing the different classes in Fire Emblem Three Houses.
We'll be going over general information about each class, like their certification requirements, stats, abilities, and their overall strengths and limitations to determine their viability and what units are a good fit for each class. As per usual, these videos will be gameplay focused, so there shouldn't really be any major spoilers, but I advise you anyways to watch at your own discretion, and if you haven't played Three Houses yet, you absolutely should.
This episode will be focused on the Pegasus Knight class. While mounted, it is a 6-move flying class, meaning it ignores all effects of terrain, positive or negative, and can traverse through certain tiles that are inaccessible for non-flyers. While dismounted, it is a 4-move infantry class with the standard terrain effects. It has 2 class abilities, those being Canto, which allows you to use your remaining movement after acting if you are mounted, and Avoid plus 10, which as you can probably guess, increases your Avoid by 10. To certify for Pegasus Knight, your units will need at least a C rank in Lances and a D rank in Flying. This doesn't have any overlap with the essential physical classes like Brigand and Archer, but it's not particularly out of the way on units who have boons and lances, especially if you've been taking advantage of group tasks to boost flying in the early game. It is important to mention that this class is gender locked to only female units. As for skill rank bonuses, Pegasus Knight grants +2 to both lances and flying, and a +1 to swords. This is the perfect set of bonuses for the path towards Falcon Knight, but to a lesser extent, they are also useful for Wyvern Lord and Wyvern Rider, at least for the flying XP, which is hard to come by. Overall, these bonuses are pretty useful, even if male units are generally a little better at using lances than female units. Lances are a great weapon type, and raising flying is useful for both certifying into strong classes later and for reaching A+ flying for Alert Stance Plus. While Cavalier also raises lances, Pegasus Knight is the only intermediate class that helps you raise your flying skill rank, so it has a unique niche in this area.
As for the base stats, Pegasus Knight has pretty solid numbers across the board. They aren't anything too crazy, as the stats often associated with Pegasus Knight being speed and res aren't too high at 8 and 4 for the bases respectively. Meanwhile, there's a pretty standard 25 HP base, an 8 in strength, 6 magic, 7 dex, 8 luck, and 5 defense. As I said, nothing too crazy and definitely wouldn't be a reason to certify for the class. However, there are also really no glaring weaknesses or shortcomings visible in these bases, even if they are pretty average. In terms of growth rates, its HP growth is right in the middle of the pack compared to the rest of the intermediate classes at +15%, worse than most of the other physical classes, but better than magic ones like Mage and ranged ones like Archer. Additionally, it has a +10% growth to both Speed and Charm, which are both relatively useful, and a pretty inconsequential +5% to its res. Overall, the growths are decent, but nothing too noteworthy that stands out amongst the intermediate class growth rates. Moving on to boosts, Pegasus Knight gets a +2 to dex, a +3 to speed while mounted or a +1 when dismounted, and a +2 to res. The boosts are about what you would expect, but the speed one is most certainly noteworthy as the highest amongst the intermediate classes, providing more speed than classes such as Thief and Brawler. Wrapping things up, Peg Knight stats definitely aren't bad, but with so much else to talk about in regards to the strengths of this class, they aren't too noteworthy overall.
Mastering Pegasus Knight grants access to Darting Blow as an equipable ability, which increases attack speed by 6 upon initiating combat. For the most part, mastering Pegasus Knight is the only way to unlock this ability, though Yuritsa gets it from his budding talent, making him the only male unit who can obtain it. It's very similar to Death Blow, Armored Blow, and Fiendish Blow, which we have discussed before. The boost only applies to player phase, it does not carry over to enemy phase after activating it in combat. While I wouldn't say Darting Blow is nearly as essential as Death Blow or Fiendish Blow, it's still a strong ability. The attack speed buff not only makes it easier for you to double enemies, but also makes it more difficult for them to double you. However, despite attack speed being used in the physical avoid formula, from my testing, Darting Blow seems to have no effect on physical avoid, so it may not actually raise your real attack speed, but is specifically accounted for during doubling calculations. Even so, Darting Blow provides a wide variety of advantages in combat, to the point where even some magic units could benefit from it if they're willing to spend the time in Pegasus Knight without their spell list, so it works with any weapon type including magic spells. It's useful in any player phase oriented unit, but it stands out the most on units who are already very speedy, at least on maddening difficulty where the enemies have very high speed. Darting Blow is one of the few enablers to keep doubling builds relevant and maddening, and it makes an excellent pairing with Battalion Desperation, allowing you to double enemies in succession rather than allowing them to counterattack in between.
As I alluded to before, this class definitely has a lot of things going for it in the strengths department. The main thing that makes it stand out is the fact that it is the only flying intermediate class, which already gives it a strong niche amongst them, given how good flight movement is. On top of that, it has a respectable 6th move and Canto due to being a mounted class. Those 3 factors alone make it easily have the best movement amongst the intermediate classes in pretty much every situation, with Cavalier only beating it out in a few perfect scenarios. The stats, while also not being crazy, are notable in some regards. Its pretty solid base res means that even though enemy archers will be an issue due to flight, enemy mages will not. As I said earlier, its speed boost while mounted is also the highest amongst intermediate classes, which synergizes well with its mastery. Speaking of the mastery, although not as important as a handful of other masteries at this stage, it's still definitely a top 5 mastery overall as it keeps speedy builds relevant on the maddening playthroughs. 6 attack speed is quite a significant amount, and if you are doubling an enemy unit on maddening, it is most likely the reason you are able to do so, assuming you have it equipped. Although it isn't the strongest intermediate mastery, it at least will always be relevant on a specific set of fast units, while still having strong versatility since it works with magic units as well. In general, the super strong and flexible movement combined with the solid stats makes us wholly believe that Pegasus Knight is easily one of the best intermediate classes in terms of combat, if not outright the best. Alongside that, its mastery contends with some of the best in the game and will be relevant throughout most of your playthrough once you acquire it.
Pegasus Knight has a few weaknesses, but they are really easy to play around to the point where they don't really hinder the class's performance much at all. It takes increased damage from bows, leaving it vulnerable to enemy archers. However, with good positioning and usage of dismounting when necessary, this really shouldn't be much of an issue at all. It's just another risk factor to consider when planning your turns, since on maddening, it essentially means you will lose a divine pulse if one of your Pegasus Knights ever gets hit by an archer while mounted. Also, while darting blow is a good mastery, it can be very situational, since many units rely on combat arts for damage in this game, and when you're using combat arts, you completely ignore the majority of the value that darting blow provides. This isn't a big deal, but it's just something to keep in mind while planning your builds. The biggest weakness of Pegasus Knight, in our opinion, would probably be the limitations of flying classes. They have to use flying battalions and flying adjutants. This means your options for adjutants are very limited, since you can only use other Pegasus Knights as their adjutants during the intermediate stage, and guard adjutants are completely unavailable. Again though, this isn't a big deal since your adjutant slots are limited anyway, especially early on. You can just use them on other units where they provide more value. The battalion issue is definitely more severe. There are very few flying battalions in the game compared to grounded ones, and during the intermediate stage, the list is even smaller since a lot of them haven't been unlocked yet. This means that you'll either need to limit how many Pegasus Knights you use so all of them get a battalion, or some of them will just have to go without a battalion, which is not ideal at all. Also, you just won't be able to take advantage of many of the best battalions in the game since they are grounded, while grounded units can still use the really good flying battalions if they want to.
With all that being said, we've decided on a final rating of 10 out of 10 for Pegasus Knight. This is probably the easiest rank we've had thus far in the series, aside from maybe Wyvern Master and Barbarossa. We genuinely believe it's probably the best intermediate class overall, with the only competition for that title being Archer. Even with its gender restrictions, there are still plenty of strong female units that can tear up maps with this class. Due to that fact, our unit recommendations will encompass most of said female units, as pretty much any good physical one will be a great Pegasus Knight. That's a pretty expansive list, which includes female Byleth, Edelgard, Bernadetta, Petra, Ingrid, Leonie, Hilda, Catherine, and Shamir. Additionally, some magic units such as Marianne and Flame can also go to this class if they want to utilize Frozen Lance, especially Marianne given how strong she can become as a Falcon Knight. The absolute best units for the class are definitely those who wish to master it, and those are usually female Byleth, Ingrid, and sometimes Leonie. This is due to the fact that these units have access to Battalion Desperation, which, as we mentioned before, synergizes really well with Darting Blow. Leonie debatably prefers to focus on Point Blank Volley, and while Shamir also gets Bat Desperation, you can usually just leave her in her starting class, Sniper, and she'll do just fine.
Pegasus Knight is an easy lock for S tier in our opinion. It does have its weaknesses, mainly the lack of flying battalions, but its strengths are just so impactful that it makes those few weaknesses easy to ignore. It makes some of the difficult early game maps so much easier, and even enables a lot of map skipping strategies due to its flight, such as Land of the Golden Deer, where you can very easily skip straight to Acheron just by flying across the water. Combine that with the fact that its mastery is essential for a certain archetype of player phase builds, and still pretty good on most other builds, and you have a class that objectively reigns supreme as one of the strongest classes for its time out of all the classes in this game, not just the intermediate ones. Most of its supposed weaknesses can be mitigated by just using it in moderation, rather than making literally all of your units into Pegasus Knights. Even having just one of them is a huge advantage compared to having none. That's basically all I have to say about the Pegasus Knight class. If you liked the video or have any thoughts of your own, please leave a like and make sure to comment.
I also recommend checking the description if you're not already subscribed to both of our channels.
Stay tuned for episode 24 on JCross's channel, where we're moving on to the first advanced class, Hero.